Alma Fenwick did not weep in front of the neighbours, not when the barn her husband Thomas built with his own 2 hands burned to the ground. Not while the harvest inside it went up like a torch, the whole of that year's wheat and the winter feed with it, gone before the sun rose. She stood in her nightdress with a shawl over her shoulders, and she watched it, dry-eyed, plain-faced, while the parish ran with buckets that did no good at all. She wept later. Alone, over one small thing pulled from the ashes, a scorched copper hare, blackened and bent, that Thomas had forged and set on the ridge the year they married. 3 days after, the clerk from the Provident Fire Office found her on the church steps. He did not lower his voice. "The premium lapsed in May, Mrs. Fenwick," he said. "The office owes you nothing." 40 neighbours heard him say it, and there was worse, because 180 fell due at Michaelmas, and if she could not find it, the land itself would be forfeit. The land Thomas had worked, the land that was all she had left of him. Then, at first light one morning, a black carriage stood at her gate. The Duke of Wexmoor stepped down from it, a man she had never once met, never spoken to, never seen. He walked her cold ashes in his fine boots. He looked at what was left, and he said he would rebuild every beam of it, every joint, and he asked her for nothing at all. Not a shilling, not a word of thanks. Why a great duke would do such a thing for a widow he did not know. Well, if you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before I go on, if a story like this is what you came here for, subscribe and stay with me. And do one small thing, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Alma's story travels. Now, let me tell it to you properly. From the beginning, Alma Fenwick had lived at Larkmere for 31 years, and for 11 of them she had lived there alone. Larkmere was a small holding at the low end of Nettlecombe parish, in the green folds of Wiltshire, where the chalk streams ran clear and the water meadows flooded silver in a wet spring. It was not a grand place. 60-odd acres, a dairy herd she could count on 2 hands, a stone farmhouse with a sagging thatch, and a barn. The barn was the pride of it. Thomas had raised it the year they were married, back when they were young and sure they would fill it with children and years. The children never came. But the years did, one after another, and Thomas filled the barn with something else instead, with work, with harvest, with the plain daily proof that a man and a woman could make a life out of a piece of ground if they only bent their backs to it. Every joint in that barn was pegged by his own hands. He would not use a nail where a peg would do. He said a nail rusts, and a good oak peg only grows tighter with the wet. Alma used to bring him his dinner in a cloth and watch him work up in the frame, 16 feet off the ground, whistling, unbothered by the height. And when the roof was on and the great doors were hung, he climbed to the very ridge with a thing wrapped in sacking under his arm. It was a weather vane. He had made it himself in the forge over 3 winter evenings and told her nothing. A leaping hare, cut from copper, mid-spring, ears flat and legs stretched, caught forever in the moment before it lands. He set it on the ridge, and it turned into the wind, and it flashed in the sun, and he came down grinning like a boy. "There," he said. "So you'll always know which way the weather's coming, Alma, and so you'll think of me when I'm out in the far field and you can't see me." She thought of him now every time she crossed the yard, because for 11 years she had crossed it alone. Thomas had died of a fever one hard January, quick and cruel, and left her a widow at 42, with a farm to run and no one to run it with. The parish waited for her to sell up. They waited for her to take a place in someone's kitchen, or go to a cousin, or ask for help. She did none of it. She got up before light, and she milked, and she mucked, and she sowed, and she reaped, and she did it year on year, and she was, in all of Nettlecombe, the one widow who had never once taken a penny of charity from anyone. Some called it strength, some called it pride. Alma did not much care which. She only knew that to take a thing you had not earned was to admit you could not stand on your own, and she would sooner starve upright than eat sitting down in another person's debt. She was 53 now, and the work showed on her, wide through the shoulders from a lifetime of lifting, grey coming in at the temples of her dark hair, which she wore twisted up plain and centre parted, no fuss. Her hands were hard and cracked and stained, and her face was steady, and her eyes were a deep green that gave away very little. She was not a woman anyone pitied to her face. They knew better. It was August, and it had been a dry one. 3 weeks with barely a cloud, the streams sunk low, the hay brittle in the fields and brittle in the store. Alma had brought in a good crop that year, better than most years, better than she'd dared hope, and it stood stacked and dry in Thomas's barn, wheat and hay both, the winter's whole security under one oak roof. She had walked through it that very evening with her lantern, running her hand over the stacks, and she had felt, for the first time in a long time, something close to easy. There was enough. There would be enough to see the beasts through to spring, and enough over to make the mortgage payment when it came. She had gone to bed early and slept the sound sleep of a woman who has done her work. She woke to the light wrong, not dawn. The window was orange, and it flickered. Alma was out of the bed and down the stairs before she was properly awake, and when she pulled the door open, the heat hit her like a hand. The barn was burning. Not smoking, burning, all of it, the whole frame roaring, flame pouring out under the eaves and up through the ridge, and the great doors already a wall of fire. A lantern, they said after. Perhaps a lantern knocked from a peg, perhaps a tramp sheltering, perhaps nothing but heat and dust, and dry August hay. It hardly mattered which. Dry hay in a dry summer needs only one spark, and then it is not a fire you fight, it is a fire you watch. She tried. God knows she tried. She ran for the pump and worked the handle and threw water that turned to steam in the air before it ever reached the wood. The neighbours came, Nell Harrow first, the dairy girl, 17 and barefoot, and then the men from the nearer farms in their nightshirts with buckets and a chain to the stream. They did what they could. It was nothing. The heat drove them back and back, and the roof went with a sound like a great sigh, all Thomas's oak pegs and joints folding in on themselves, and the copper hare on the ridge lit up bright as a coin for one moment before it fell into the fire with the rest. By dawn it was done. Where the barn had stood there was a black square of ash and glowing timber, and the smell, that smell of burnt grain that would not leave the yard for a week. The harvest was gone. The winter feed was gone. The barn Thomas built was gone. And Alma Fenwick stood in the grey morning in her nightdress and her shawl and did not make a sound. The neighbours watched her and waited for her to break, and she did not break. She thanked them, each by name, for coming. She sent them home to their beds. And when the last of them had gone, she walked out into the wreck of it, into the hot ash that burned through her boots, and she knelt down where the ridge had fallen. She dug with her bare hands. She did not know she was looking for it until she found it. The copper hare, scorched black, one ear bent flat where a beam had come down on it, the bright metal gone dull and dark. She lifted it out of the ash and held it against her, and only then, with no one left to see, did Alma Fenwick weep. Not for the harvest. Not even for the barn, for the man whose hands had made the thing she held, and for the plain terrible fact that everything he had built with those hands could be taken from her in one night, and she could do nothing but watch it burn. She did not weep long. There was no profit in it. She washed her hands and her face at the pump, and she saw to the beasts, because the beasts did not know the world had ended and still wanted milking. And she set the blackened hare on the kitchen windowsill where she could see it, and she began, in her plain and stubborn way, to reckon what could be done. The answer, when it came, was not much. The Provident Fire Office was the first blow, and it was public, which made it worse. Alma had held a policy on the barn for years, a small sum, a few shillings a quarter, The one indulgence she allowed herself against exactly this kind of ruin, she had paid it faithfully. Or she had thought she had. When the clerk came down from the town, she met him at the church, because that was where the parish business was done. And half of Nettlecombe was on the steps for one reason or another when he opened his ledger and told her, in a carrying voice, that the payment due in May had never reached the office. Lapsed, he said. The word sat in the air. A lapsed premium voids the policy in full. The office, he said, owed her nothing. Alma stood very straight. I sent it, she said. In May. With the carrier, as I always do. The office has no record of it. Mrs. Fenwick. He closed the ledger. He was not a cruel man, only a clerk. Only doing the thing that clerks do, which is to make a rule stand between a person and their ruin and call it fair. I am sorry for your loss. Truly, but there is nothing to be done. 40 neighbours heard it. She felt their eyes on her back like heat. Some of them were sorry for her. Some of them, she knew, were already turning it over, the widow of Larkmere, ruined at last, the proud one brought down. She did not give them the satisfaction of a single tear or a single hard word. She said, I see. Thank you for coming so far to tell me, and she turned and walked home with her chin level and her hands steady, and it was the longest walk of her life. The second blow came 4 days later, and it came smiling. His name was Silas Crane. He drove up to Larkmere in a neat gig with a good horse, in a good coat, a man of perhaps 40, with a soft handshake and a way of looking at a place that valued it as he looked. He was an agent, he said, of the Marden Land and Rail Company. He was so very sorry for her misfortune. He had heard of it, the whole county had heard of it, and he had come, he said, not to trouble her in her grief, but to be of use. You'll want to be practical, Mrs. Fenwick, he said, standing in her yard with his back to the black ruin as though it were not there. A woman alone, at your time of life, with the barn gone and no crop and the winter coming. It's a great deal to carry. My company has an interest in this valley. The water meadow, chiefly, the low ground by the stream. We'd take the whole of the acreage off your hands. Give you a clean start somewhere easier. £90, and no more worry. £90. For 60 acres, and a house, and a life. It was a third of the worth of it, and they both knew that, and his smiling did not waver an inch. The land, said Alma slowly, is worth 3 times that. The land was worth 3 times that, said Crane gently, before it was a burned-out smallholding with a mortgage on it and a widow who can't work it alone. He let that sit. Then, softer still, as if it pained him, forgive me. I don't say it to wound. But there's arrears against the place, isn't there? £180 falling due at Michaelmas. 29 days, I make it, and if it isn't paid, he spread his hands. Well, better £90 in your pocket than the whole taken for nothing. Think on it. I'm a patient man. He tipped his hat, and he drove away, and Alma stood in her yard and understood with a cold, clear certainty that she was being hunted. Not out of malice. Worse than malice, out of business. The rail company wanted her water meadow for its line, wanted it cheap and wanted it ruined, and the fire had done half their work for them. She had 29 days to find £180 that she did not have and could not raise, or lose everything Thomas had ever touched to a man in a good coat, who called it patience. That same week, though she could not have known it, a very different conversation was taking place 40 miles off, in a house so large that the burning of Larkmere's barn would not have filled one of its lesser rooms. At Wexmoor Hall, the Duke of Wexmoor stood at a tall window with his solicitor at his elbow and a paper in the solicitor's hand. "It's a small estate matter, Your Grace," the solicitor was saying. "A trifling thing, really. I only mention it because, see to it," said the Duke. He did not turn from the window. Quietly, "I don't need the particulars." And the solicitor, who had learned long ago not to press, bowed and put the paper away, and the matter, whatever it was closed. The Duke went on looking out of his great window at his great empty park, at the deer and the oaks and the long shadows, alone as he was every hour of every day, and said nothing more about it at all. Gideon Vaunce, Duke of Wexmoor, was 55 years old and had been a widower for 11 of them. His wife, the Duchess Cecily, had died young and childless and taken the warmth of the hall with her when she went. He had a title and land in 3 counties and money past the counting of it, and no one at all. He did not complain. It was not in him to complain. But a man can rattle around inside a great house for 11 years and grow very quiet, and Gideon had grown so quiet that his own servants sometimes forgot he was in a room. The carriage came to Larkmere on a grey morning at the very edge of dawn. Alma was in the yard already, she was always in the yard already, with a pail in her hand, and she straightened at the sound of the wheels and could not for a moment make sense of what she saw. A carriage like that did not come to Larkmere. A carriage like that did not come to Nettlecombe. It was black and polished and drawn by 2 matched horses, and when the door opened and the man stepped down, in dark, plain, costly clothes, she knew before anyone told her that this was somebody far above her station, and she felt her back go stiff with it. He did not announce himself. He walked past her, almost as if he had not seen her, straight to the black square where the barn had been. He stood at the edge of the ash. He looked at it a long time. Then he stepped into it, into the char and the cold cinders, in his fine boots, and he walked the whole ruin slowly, from where the doors had hung to where the ridge had fallen, and he crouched once and picked up a fallen oak peg, burned but whole, and turned it in his fingers, and set it down again with a strange care. Only then did he come back to her. "You are Mrs. Fenwick," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am." She did not curtsy. She was not sure she remembered how, and she was not sure she would have if she had. "And who is it walks my ashes without a word, sir?" Something moved in his face, not offence, almost the opposite. "Wexmoor," he said. "Gideon Vaunce." "Forgive me. I have very poor manners these days. I am out of the habit of people." He looked back at the ruin and then at her, and he said the thing that made no sense at all. "I have come to rebuild your barn, madam, all of it, every beam. You are not to trouble yourself about the cost of it, or the men, or the timber. It will be seen to." Alma stared at him. In 31 years at Larkmere she had heard a great many things in that yard, but never that. "You've come to," she stopped. She started again, carefully, the way you speak to a man who may be mad or mocking. "I don't know you, sir, your grace. I have never in my life set eyes on you. And you have never set eyes on me. Barns don't get built by strangers for nothing. What is it you want with Larkmere?" "Nothing," said the Duke. "Men who want nothing," said Alma, "don't drive 40 miles at dawn to say so." And there it was, the first thing she liked about him, though she would not have called it liking then. He did not flinch from that. He did not smile his way past it the way Crane had. He looked at her, steady, and he said, "That is a fair thing to say, and a wise one, and I have no answer to it that you'll believe standing here. So I won't try to give you one. I'll only tell you the barn will go up, whether you thank me or not. Good day to you, Mrs. Fenwick," and he got back into his carriage and was gone up the lane before she had gathered breath to refuse him. She refused him anyway, to the empty air. "I'll not be beholden," she said, to no one. Not to a duke, nor a devil, nor any man living, and she went back to her milking with her jaw set, and told herself she had seen the last of him. She had not. The carriage stood at Larkmere 3 days running. The whole valley marked it. You could not have a duke's carriage at a widow's gate 3 days together, and not have the whole valley mark it, and by the 3rd day Nettlecombe talked of nothing else. It came to a head at the harvest home. There was to be a gathering that week. There always was, at the end of the reaping, a supper on the green with the trestle tables out and the ale and the fiddle, the whole parish together. Alma had not meant to go. She had nothing to celebrate and no wish to be looked at. But Nell begged her, and it would have looked like hiding to stay away, and Alma Fenwick did not hide. So she came, plain and straight-backed, and she was making her way across the green when the Duke's carriage drew up at the edge of it, and the Duke himself got down, and, before 40 pairs of eyes and the stopped fiddle, walked straight to Alma and offered his hand to help her up over the rough ground and the cart rut by the gate. The whole green saw it, a Duke, handing a widow farmer down over a ditch as though she were a lady at a ball. The talk went round like fire in dry hay. What does Wexmoor want with her? A woman like that? What's she to a Duke? And under the words, the older, uglier one, the one Alma had spent 11 years keeping off her own door, pity curdling now into something worse, into speculation. She was mortified, not for herself, for Thomas, for Larkmere, for the plain dignity she had held so hard and so long, made suddenly into a spectacle. She took her hand back from his. She walked him a little apart, away from the ears, and she spoke to him low and level and furious. "You must stop this," she said. "Whatever it is you think you're doing, you're making me a talking piece, a Duke's charity case. Do you understand what they'll say? What they're saying already? I have kept myself clean of every man's purse in this parish for 11 years, and you'll undo it in 3 days with your carriage and your kindness. I cannot pay you back. Do you hear me? I have not got it, and I will never have it. And I will not be your project, sir. I am not a ruin for a rich man to be sorry over." And Gideon Vaughan looked down at this hard, proud, frightened woman in her mended shawl, and he did not draw himself up, and he did not take offence. He said, very quietly, so that only she could hear it, "I have never once thought of you as a ruin, Mrs. Fenwick. I have thought that a great wrong was done here, and that I was near enough to set some part of it right, and that not to would be the coward's road. You may keep your dignity whole. I'll not ask you for a thing, not thanks, not payment, not so much as a civil word, but I'll not stand by and watch that land taken from you either. Now, will you go back to your neighbours, or will you let them see you quarrel with a duke and give them a better tale still?" She had no answer to that. She went back to her neighbours. But something in her chest had shifted a half-inch, and she did not like it, and she could not undo it. It was the first crack in the ice. She thought he would send men. Rich men sent men. She braced for a foreman and a gang of strangers, for money doing the work while the Duke sat in his hall, 40 miles off, feeling well about himself. That was not what came. What came, 4 mornings later, at the very edge of dawn, was the Duke himself, in his shirt-sleeves. Alma came out with her pail and stopped dead. There were men in the yard, yes, 6 or 8 hired men with barrows and shovels, but there in the middle of them, with his fine coat hung on the gatepost and his sleeves rolled and his fine boots already grey to the ankle, was Gideon Vaughan, Duke of Wexmoor, shovelling cold ash into a barrow with the rest of them. He did not do it for show. He did not stop when she came out. He nodded to her once and went on with it, bending and lifting, clearing the black wreck of Thomas's barn 1 barrow load at a time, and the sweat cut clean lines down through the soot on his face. Alma stood and watched him a long moment. Then she set down her pail, and she picked up a shovel, and she went and worked beside him, because she was damned if a duke would clear her ground while she stood and looked on. They worked the whole morning without much talking. But there is a thing that happens between 2 people who bend their backs to the same hard work, side by side, in the same dirt, a thing that no amount of talking can buy. By noon the ground was half cleared, and the great cold weight of the ruin looked, for the first time, like something that might one day be a barn again and not a grave. He came back the next day, and the next. The pump had seized the winter before, and she'd nursed it along and never had the money for the part, and one afternoon she found him at it, with his sleeves rolled and a spanner in his blackened hands, and he took the handle to pieces, and cleaned the seized valve and freed it, and worked it, and clean water came up gasping and cold, more water than she'd had from it in a year. He said nothing about it, he simply mended it, the way a man mends a thing that needs mending, and moved on to the next. And there was the tea. Nell told that story after, all round the parish, because Nell had seen it, and it was the moment the girl said she knew. On the third or fourth day, Alma had made tea for the men, and she'd set the cups out on a plank, and she'd passed the Duke his without thinking, without a word, and she'd made it the way she made her own, black, no milk, no sugar. It was how she'd learned to take it in the lean years after Thomas, when milk was for selling and sugar was a luxury she could not justify, and she'd never gone back to it after, the taste of plenty gone strange to her. Gideon had taken the cup, and Nell, watching, saw him pause, saw him look at the black tea, and then, for just a second, at Alma, and then drink it down without a word of complaint, as if it were the finest thing he'd been given in 11 years. The next day he asked for it that way. Black, no sugar, Mrs. Fenwick, if you please. As if it were his own habit, as if he had always taken it so. Nell, 17 and sharp as a new pin, said to Alma that evening in the dairy, "He watches how you take yours." "He does no such thing," said Alma. "He does," said Nell. "He learned it off you, and now he takes it the same. That's not a duke being charitable, Mrs., that's a man paying attention." And she smiled her cat smile, and went back to the churns, and left Alma standing with a full pail and a face she was glad the girl couldn't see. Still Alma did not understand the why of it, and the why gnawed at her, because a woman who cannot receive a gift will always go looking for the price of it. She got her answer at last on a still evening at the end of the week, when the ash was cleared, and the ground stood bare and ready, and the two of them sat a moment on the low wall to catch their breath before the light went. "You'll tell me now," said Alma. "You said you'd no answer I'd believe, standing in the ash." "Well, the ash is cleared. So tell me plain, sir, why a duke I never met has spent his week black to the elbows in my yard. And don't say nothing. I've earned the true thing." Gideon was quiet a while. He looked out over the water meadow where the stream ran low and silver in the last light. Then he said, "You had a husband." "Thomas, I did." Her voice went careful. "You never knew Thomas." "I met him once," said the Duke. "I did not know his name. I was young, younger than you'd think to look at me now, a boy really 25 and full of myself the way boys of 25 are. I was riding hard through this valley on a bad horse in a wet spring, and I put him at the mill race to jump it, and I was a fool, and the horse balked and threw me clean in. The race was in flood. I could not swim it. The water had me, and I went under it twice, and I had made my peace near enough that I would not come up a third time. He turned the burned oak peg over in his fingers. She saw he had kept it, had carried it in his pocket all this week, and a young farmer came off the bank into the flood after me, held me up, dragged me out onto the mud half drowned, and thumped the water out of me, and got me breathing. And when I could speak, and tried to thank him, tried to tell him who I was, tried to press money on him, he wouldn't have it, wouldn't give his name. Said any man would do the same, and I plainly needed to get dry, and he had a field to see to, and he walked off and left me, and I never learned who he was. The light was almost gone now. Alma had gone very still. "I looked," said Gideon. "For years, on and off I looked, in the idle way of a man who means to do a thing and never quite does. A young farmer in a wet valley. It's not much to go on. And then this summer I heard of a fire at a place called Larkmere, and a widow ruined by it. And something, I don't know what, made me ask the name of the man who'd farmed it. Thomas Fenwick. And I knew him. 30 years too late, I knew him. The boy who pulled me out of the mill race and asked me for nothing. He set the peg down on the wall between them, gently. I could not thank him. He was gone. So I have come to thank the only person left who carries his name. I am paying a debt older than you know, madam. That is all. There is no other why. Alma sat with the copper of the sunset on her hard, plain face, and she did not know what to do with any of it. Because it was the truest thing anyone had told her in 11 years, and it moved her more than she could bear to be moved, the thought of Thomas, young and grinning and careless of his own life, going off that bank into the flood and never once mentioning it to her, never once boasting of it, a whole life saved and folded quietly away like everything else her husband ever did well. Her guard dropped a full degree, there on the wall, and she felt it go and could not stop it. But she was still Alma Fenwick, and so even as her eyes stung she heard the word he'd used, and she held to it like a rail in the dark. "A debt," she said softly. "You said a debt." "I did." "Then it's owing, still. It's paying off." "It's not." She stopped. She stood up from the wall. "It's a kindness born of owing, and I understand owing, sir, better than you'd think. So I'll not stop you. God knows I've no other road left. But don't dress it as a gift given free. It's a debt you're squaring with a dead man through his widow, and I'll take it only as that, and no more." And she picked up her pail and went in to see to the supper, and left him sitting on the wall with the burned peg beside him and the last of the light going out of the meadow. She lay awake that night, longer than she meant to. And somewhere in the small hours she got up and went down to the cold kitchen and took the scorched copper hare down off the windowsill and sat with it in her lap in the dark for a long time, turning it in her hard hands the way the Duke turned the peg in his. Thomas's hair, bent-eared and blackened, dragged out of the fire that had taken everything else. She thought of the man who'd made it, and the man who'd carried a burned peg 40 miles in his pocket, and the ground standing cleared and waiting in the yard, and she made up her mind about a thing. In the morning she found the Duke where he always was now, in the yard at the edge of dawn, marking out the lines of the new barn with pegs and string. And Alma Fenwick walked out to him with the blackened hair held in both her hands, out from the windowsill where it had sat since the fire, and she stood in front of him, and it cost her more than the whole ruined harvest to say the words, but she said them. "When it's built," she said, "the new barn, I want this on the ridge of it. Not a new one. This one. Thomas made it. I want it reforged, mended, gilded, whatever the smith must do, and set back up top where it stood so the new stands on the old and doesn't wipe it out." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not quite. "It's not to be your barn, sir, nor the parish's charity, nor a debt squared and done. If it goes up as Thomas's still and mine, with his hair on the roof of it turning in the wind. That's my one condition. Take it, or drive your carriage home." And the Duke of Wexmoor looked at the small blackened thing in her strong scarred hands, and at the woman holding it out to him at last of her own free will, and something happened in his quiet face that neither of them had a word for. He put out his hands, soot-stained, careful as if she were passing him something living, and he had just opened his mouth to answer her when they both turned at the sound of wheels in the lane and saw the neat gig of the Marden Land and Rail Company coming down toward the gate, and Silas Crane in his good coat, smiling, with a folded paper in his hand. Crane got down from the gig slow, the way a man does when he wants to be watched doing it. He set his hat straight. He looked at the two of them standing there, the Duke with his soot-stained hands still half raised, Alma with the black hair held out between them like something offered at an altar. "Mrs. Fenwick," Crane said. "And company, I see." Alma drew the hair back against her chest. She didn't answer him. She'd learned that much this month. You give a man like Crane nothing to catch hold of. "I'll come to it plain," Crane said, "since you're a plain woman." He tapped the folded paper against his gloved palm. "The Marden Land and Rail Company has instructed me to raise the offer. £120. For the whole of Larkmere, the water meadow chief among it. That clears your Michaelmas note and leaves you 30 over. A woman your age could take a cottage in the village on £30 and never dig another furrow. He held the paper out. Nobody took it. 120, he said again, as if the number itself should have knocked her down. Alma looked at the paper. Then she looked past it, out at the cleared ground, the pegs, the string running straight and white in the morning light where a barn was going to stand again. "It's not for sale," she said. Crane smiled. He'd expected that. "It will be," he said, "come the 29th day. When the office takes it for the arrears and sells it to us for nothing at all, and you walk off it with your apron and your dead man's weather vane and not a shilling. I'm offering you £120 to keep that from happening, Mrs. Fenwick, out of Christian feeling." "Out of Christian feeling," Alma said. The Duke stepped forward then. He put himself, quiet, between Crane and the woman. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "The lady has given you her answer," Gideon said. Twice, Crane's eyes moved over him, took in the rolled sleeves, the ash on his forearms, the good boots gone grey with cinder. Crane didn't know yet who he was. That was the thing Alma saw, and it near made her laugh. This land agent in his clean coat, looking down his nose at a labourer, and the labourer the Duke of Wexmoor. "And who might you be?" Crane said, to speak for her. "A neighbour," said Gideon. Crane snorted. He put the paper back in his coat. "You'll both feel differently on Michaelmas morning," he said. He climbed up into the gig. He gathered the reins. "The company is patient, Mrs. Fenwick. The company can wait 29 days. Can you?" Then he was gone, the wheels turning neat in the lane, the dust settling behind him. Alma stood a long moment. The hair was warm now from being held against her. Gideon turned back to her, and she remembered, all at once, that he hadn't answered her. About the hair, about the ridge. "You never said," she told him. "Said what?" "Whether you'd do it." "My condition." Thomas's hair mended and set back up top. She lifted it a little. "Or whether Crane's paper made up your mind for you, and you'll drive off after him." The Duke reached out. He took the hair from her hands. He held it up to the light and turned it, and the scorch on it went from black to a dull red where the copper showed through. He looked at the leaping thing a long time. "I'll take it to my own smith at Wexmoor," he said. "There's a man there worked 40 years in metal. He'll not make it new. He'll mend what's broken and gild what's left, and every dent your husband's hammer put in it will still be in it when it goes up on that ridge. On my word." He lowered it. "The new upon the old, madam, as you asked. Not a stroke of it forgotten." Alma's throat worked. She nodded once, because she couldn't do more. "Then build it," she said. He built it. Not with money thrown at the thing from a distance, the way she'd feared. He came himself. He came at first light most mornings. 40 miles his coach must have gone in the dark to put him at her gate by dawn. And he worked. 6 hired men he'd brought, good carpenters, and himself among them in his shirt-sleeves, and you could not always at a glance tell the Duke from the joiners, but for the way the joiners called him Sir. The frame went up plank by plank, green oak, the same as Thomas had used, because Alma said Thomas had used it, and that settled it. The men pegged the joints by hand. No nails in the main frame. Thomas hadn't held with nails in a frame, and she wouldn't have it now. The pump by the dairy had seized in the summer, the handle stiff as a dead branch, and one afternoon Alma came out and found the Duke on his knees in the mud, with the mechanism apart on a cloth beside him, greasing the parts one by one with his own hands. He got it working. He worked the handle, and the water came cold and clean, and he cupped some and drank, and looked up at her half a boy about it. It only wanted freeing, he said. Rust and neglect. Nothing was broken in it. Later she brought tea out to the men. She brought the Duke his in the chipped blue cup, black, no sugar, because she'd told him once at the start she took it that way, and he had watched, and remembered, and now he took his the same without being asked. A small thing, she noticed it. She noticed it. Nell noticed too. Nell noticed everything. The dairy girl leaned on the fence with the milk yoke still on her shoulders and watched the Duke hand Alma down off the hay cart one evening, careful, his hand under her elbow like she was made of eggshell, and Nell said, "Lo, he doesn't look at you like a man paying a debt. Mrs." "Hush," said Alma. "He looks at you like a man that's decided something," Nell said. "Hush and take the milk in," said Alma. But she didn't forget it. It was Nell, in the end, who told her the why of it, not the Duke. The Duke would never have told her plain. He loved through doing and not through saying, and if Alma had waited for him to sit her down and explain himself, she'd have waited to her grave. But the village talked, and Nell's uncle had been a groom at Wexmoor 30 years back, and the story had come down the way stories do, and one grey afternoon in the milking shed, Nell told it all in a rush, half afraid she oughtn't. 30 years ago, near enough, a young lord had gone riding by the Nettlecombe mill, full of himself and full of drink, and his horse had shied at the sluice and thrown him clean into the mill race where it ran fast and deep after the autumn rain. He'd gone under. He'd not come up. And a farm boy cutting withies on the bank had gone in after him without stopping to pull his own boots off, and hauled the lord out by the collar half drowned and pumped the water from him, and never once asked his name or his rank or a farthing for his trouble. The lord had come to on the grass with the sky spinning. The farm boy was already gone back to his withies, and the lord was Gideon Vaughan's, not yet a duke, 25 and immortal until that hour. And the farm boy, Nell said, the farm boy was Thomas Fenwick. Alma stood very still in the milking shed with her hand on the cow's warm flank. "He never told me," she said. "In 31 years, Thomas never once told me he pulled a man from the mill race." "Maybe he didn't think it worth the telling," Nell said. Him, and that was the truth of Thomas, wasn't it? He'd have thought a life saved was a morning's work and not worth a boast at supper. He'd carried it 30 years and said nothing, the way he'd carried everything. That evening Alma went out to where the Duke was setting a brace, and she stood by him until he stopped, and she said, "You never told me either. Why you came." Gideon set his mallet down. He looked at her across the half-built dark of the frame. "I came for the fire," he said. "I read of it, that a barn had burned at Larkmere and the widow left with nothing. Larkmere, Fenwick. I had spent 30 years not knowing the name of the man who pulled me out of that water. My father made inquiries after and got nowhere. The boy had gone home and told no one, and then I read a name in a column in a newspaper 30 years on, and I knew it the way you know your own." He was quiet a moment. "I came to repay a debt older than you know, madam. I could not repay it to the man. He is gone. So I came to repay it to what he left." There it was. The word. Debt and Alma's guard, which had come down 1 degree, held where it was, because that was the fear, wasn't it? That she was a ledger to him, a column to be balanced. Thomas saved him, so he would save Thomas's widow, and the books would be square, and he would drive home to his great empty hall satisfied. "Then you'll build it," she said, "and be quit of us, and sleep easy." "If that is what you wish," said Gideon. She didn't answer that. She went in. The season turned, the nights sharpened. There came an evening in the last of September when the sky went hard and clear, and the Duke, walking the yard at dusk, stopped and looked up and said, "There'll be frost tonight." The first of it. Alma's seedlings. Her winter greens under their frames by the dairy wall, the only green thing she had left to sell come the lean months, everything else burned. A hard frost would take the lot. She'd have gone out herself at midnight with sacking. She'd done it alone 11 winters. But when she came out at midnight, with her arms full of sacking, he was already there. He and no hired man, the men all gone home to their beds. Just the Duke of Wexmoor on his knees in the white grass in the moonlight, laying straw and sacking over her seedling frames one by one, his breath smoking, tucking the edges down against the cold with hands that had never wanted for a fire in all his life. She stood in the doorway and watched him a while before he knew she was there. "You'll catch your death," she said. "So would they," he said, meaning the seedlings, and went on tucking. She came out and knelt down across the frame from him and worked the other side, and they covered the greens together in the frost and the moonlight, and neither of them said anything at all, and it was the loudest silence she'd stood inside in 11 years. They raised the roof tree at Michaelmas week. The great beam, the ridge piece that would carry the whole roof, and one day the mended hare above it. It took every man on the place, and the two of them besides. They hauled it up on ropes, all of them together, the beam swinging slow, and at the top it had to be set true into its seat, and it wanted 2 pairs of hands guiding it home, and it was Alma's hands and Gideon's on the same beam at the same moment, pushing it the last inch into place. Her scarred brown hands, and his beside them, near enough to touch, and not touching. The beam went home with a sound like a door shutting somewhere deep in the frame. The men cheered. And Alma looked up, and there was the ridge of her barn against the sky again, bare oak, waiting, and she had to turn away so no one would see her face. Gideon saw it. He saw everything, that man, and said none of it. He only stood beside her, close, and said quiet, so only she could hear it. "A gift with a price is only a purchase. I have never in my life bought what I most wanted." She didn't know what he meant by it. Or she wouldn't let herself know. She held it, though. It stayed with her, that sentence, all the days after. Crane came back once more before the end. He came on foot this time, no gig, and he found Alma at the churchyard wall on a market morning, and he was not smiling now. "You'll want to know," he said, low and mean, "that it's out of my hands. The note, your Michaelmas note, somebody's bought it up, bought the whole of your debt out from under the company, over my head, without a word to me." His mouth twisted. £180 paid to the Provident Office to hold your paper. Some fine gentleman playing at charity. "So you needn't fear me any longer, Mrs. Fenwick. You've a new landlord now. And a landlord's a landlord, whatever coat he wears." He said it to wound, and it wounded, but not the way he meant. Alma stood at the wall, and the cold went through her that had nothing to do with the weather. Somebody had bought her debt, held her note, owned the ground she stood on and the roof they'd raised and every plank of it. She knew who. Of course she knew who. There was only one man in the whole of it with £180 to spend on a widow's ruin, and he'd been spending on her for a month. She didn't say it to Crane. She gave him her plain face and let him go off thinking he'd landed his blow. But she walked home the 4 miles from the village, not feeling the road under her, and the barn when she came to it. The fine half-roofed barn, with the light coming through the bare rafters, looked to her all at once like a cage that a rich man had built around her while she thanked him for it. She went looking for the proof, and she found it. She hadn't wanted to. Part of her had hoped Crane lied. But there was a little office the Duke had set up in the old dairy loft, a table and a deed box for the papers of the work, and Alma climbed up to it that same evening and opened the box, and there it was near the top, folded once, official, the seal of the Provident Fire Office upon it, the mortgage note on Larkmere Farm. £180, redeemed and assigned. And the name written in the assignment, the name of the man who now held the debt, was Gideon Vaughan's, Duke of Wexmoor. She sat down on the little stool by the table with the paper in her lap. She heard the whole month over again, all at once, in Crane's voice. He didn't rebuild your barn, he bought it. He bought the water meadow Crane wanted, and he bought the ground, and he bought the roof, and he bought you, exactly as Crane meant to. Only Crane offered £90, and this one offered a whole winter of dawns and a mended weather vane and tea taken black with no sugar. And you near fell for it. You near forgot yourself. You, that never took a charity in 11 years, You let a duke make you his charity and called it neighbourliness. She sat there until it was full dark. Then she folded the note back the way she'd found it, and she went down the loft ladder, and she waited for the morning. He came at dawn, as he always came. She was in the yard already, in her good shawl, not her work things. The men weren't there yet. It was just the two of them in the grey light with the half-built barn over them. "You're up before the birds," he said, and smiled, and came toward her. "Stop there," said Alma. He stopped. She held up the folded note. She'd taken it from the box. She held it up so he could see it. "I found this," she said. "In your deed box. My mortgage note. £180, redeemed, assigned to you." Her voice was level. She was proud of that after. It never once shook. "Crane told me somebody'd bought my debt over his head. I told myself he lied. He didn't lie. It was you. It's been you the whole while." The Duke's face changed, not to guilt, to something worse, to a kind of stricken understanding, because he saw in one instant what she'd made of it, and he saw that he'd built it himself, plank by plank, and never seen it coming. "Alma," he said. "It isn't. Don't." She wasn't loud. She never got loud. That was the thing about Alma Fenwick. She could level a man to the ground at a whisper. "Don't tell me what it isn't. I've read it. Your name. My land. You hold my note. You hold the ground and the roof and the debt and all. You could put me off tomorrow if you'd a mind." She laughed, one hard breath of it, and I stood in that frost and covered my greens beside you and thought, there's a good man. There's a plain good man that came for kindness' sake. And all the while you were buying me up quiet, the same as Crane, only Crane at least had the decency to name his price out loud. "I bought the note," Gideon said, "to keep it out of Crane's hands, to keep the company from taking your land for the arrears. Nothing more. You never meant me to find it," said Alma. "That's the size of what you meant. That landed." She watched it land. "You said a gift with a price is only a purchase," she said. "You said it to me on the roof tree, and I carried it about like it was a fine thing, and here's the price all along, folded up in a box in my own loft. My name owed to yours. My whole life's work held in your hand like a bird you might close your fingers on." She set the note down on the sawhorse between them. "I won't be owned, sir, not by Crane and not by a duke. Not for £90 and not for 180 and not for the finest barn in Wiltshire. I was a fool to let it go this far. Take your men and your green oak and go home to your hall. I'll manage the Michaelmas how I've managed everything." Alone, her chin was up. Her voice was level to the last word, and the Duke of Wexmoor, who had faced down Parliament committees and never flinched, stood in her yard and had nothing. He looked at her a long moment. Then he bowed his head, once, the smallest bow, and he said only, "As you wish it, madam," and he turned and walked to his horse and rode out of the gate, and left the barn standing half-roofed and open to the sky. Michaelmas came 4 days after. The arrears fell due at noon, in the parish, before the churchwardens, the way such things were done. And it wasn't only the wardens who came. The whole village came, near enough, 40 and more of them, the same 40 who'd stood on the church steps in August and heard the fire clerk say the office owed her nothing. They came to see the end of it, to see the widow of Larkmere lose her land at last, and be sorry, and shake their heads, and go home. Pity had brought them out. Pity was the only thing the village had ever had to give her, and she'd never once taken it, and now they'd see it collected whether she liked it or no. Alma came in her black. She had £80 she'd scraped and borrowed, and it was not near enough, and she knew it, and she stood in the churchyard with the churchwardens and the clerk of the Provident Office and Silas Crane at the edge of it in his good coat, waiting, patient, to buy the ruin cheap the moment it fell forfeit. Nell was there. Nell had hold of Alma's sleeve. And then there were wheels in the lane, and the black carriage of Wexmoor came down to the churchyard gate, and the Duke of Wexmoor got down from it in his good coat this time, not his shirt-sleeves, a duke to the eye of every soul there, and the whole churchyard went quiet as a held breath. He didn't come to Alma. He went first to the clerk of the Provident Office and to the churchwardens, at the table where the parish register lay open. "I hold the mortgage note on Larkmere Farm," he said, and his voice carried, he meant it to carry, assigned to me from your office this month past, £180. "Is that acknowledged?" The clerk allowed that it was. "Then witness this," said the Duke. And he took out a paper. Not the note, another paper. A deed, drawn and sealed and signed, and he laid it open on the table before the wardens and the clerk, and let them read it, and he read the heart of it out loud for the village to hear. It was the freehold of Larkmere Farm, 60 acres and the buildings and the water meadow and all, conveyed, absolutely and forever, into the sole name of Alma Fenwick, widow of Larkmere, free of all charge, free of all lien, hers and hers only, to hold or to sell or to leave to whom she pleased, and no man living with a claim upon 1 foot of it. The churchyard made a sound, a low sound, 40 people drawing breath at once. Then the Duke took the folded note, her note, the £180, out of his coat. There was a brazier by the wall where the sexton burned the churchyard leaves, coals in it, red. Gideon walked to it. He held the note up so they could all see what it was, and he put it into the coals, and it caught and curled and burned and went to black flakes and up in smoke over the churchyard, and the debt with it gone into the cold bright Michaelmas air. "There is no note," said the Duke, to the wardens, to the clerk, to the 40. "There is no debt. There is no charge upon Larkmere. The land is Mrs. Fenwick's, wholly and only, and has been signed into her name this morning, before you all as witness, so that it can never again be taken from her by any office or company or man." He turned. He looked at Alma across the churchyard, one look, and there was no asking in it, none. I require nothing of her in return. Not thanks. Not her hand. Not a word. The land is hers. Good day to you all. And he bowed to the wardens, and he turned, and he walked back toward the Lick Gate and his carriage, to go, having asked nothing, exactly nothing. The thing he'd said from the first, that no one had believed, least of all her, but he'd forgotten Crane. Or he hadn't forgotten Crane. Perhaps he'd known, because the churchwardens, with the deed open before them, read on, and the deed said the water meadow was Alma's, unencumbered, unsellable out from under her, and that killed the thing Crane's whole company had come for. There could be no rail spur across a water meadow held free and clear by a woman who'd said twice to his face, "It isn't for sale." And Crane's own superior was there. He'd come down from Marden to see the land fall, the way you come to see a debt collected. And he read the deed over the warden's shoulder, and his face went stiff, and he turned on Crane in front of the whole village. "You told me this land would be ours by noon for the arrears," the superior said. "You told me the widow was ruined, and the meadow as good as bought. And here it's signed away free and unsellable before the whole parish, and you standing in your good coat with nothing to show. You've cost the company a season and a spur, Crane. Go back to Marden. You're recalled. Don't trouble to call at the office, your things will be sent on." Crane stood there in the churchyard with everyone looking, and Alma, who had said nothing to the wardens and nothing to the Duke, walked over to him at last. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him plain, the way she'd looked at him at the gate the first day. "You offered me £90 for my life's work," she said. Quiet, dry, and then 120 out of Christian feeling. "It was never for sale, Mr. Crane. Not at 90, not at 1,000. Some things aren't." She let that sit. "The road can go round by Marden. There's nothing here for you." And she turned her back on him and walked away, and Silas Crane got up into his gig alone with no one to see him off, and drove out of Nettlecombe, and Larkmere never heard the sound of him again. The village stood in the churchyard and looked at the deed in the widow's hand, and looked at the Duke's carriage at the Lick Gate, the Duke already climbing up into it to go, having asked nothing. Having burned the note in front of them, having signed away 60 acres and a barn and 40 miles of dawns for a woman he'd required nothing of. And the pity they'd come out with, the head shaking sorry for her pity, had nowhere left to go. It turned, in 40 chests at once, into something else. Something more like awe. They'd never seen the like. There wasn't a soul among them who'd have believed a man could give so much and ask so plainly for nothing, and there it was, done before their eyes. And it was Nell who moved. 17 years old, with the milk still on her apron, Nell Harrow ran. She ran across the churchyard and out the light gate and caught the Duke's sleeve just as he took the carriage step, caught it in her fist and held on. "Don't you go, sir," Nell said, breathless, fierce. "Don't you dare go. You wait." And the Duke, astonished, waited. Alma came to him at the light gate. She came slow, through the parted village, the deed to her whole life folded in her hand, and she stood in front of the man who'd given it to her and asked her for nothing, and for a moment the two of them just looked at one another in the cold Michaelmas light, and the whole parish held its breath to watch. She didn't make a speech. Alma Fenwick had never made a speech in her life, and she didn't begin now. She had misjudged him, and she knew it, and standing there she understood the whole of it at last, the note bought not to own her but to shield her, the freehold signed into her name alone, so that even his own gift could never be a chain. The man's whole clumsy, wordless month of dawns that had only ever meant the one thing he could not bring himself to say. He loved through doing, he'd done everything, and she'd nearly sent him off for it. She used his name, she'd never once used it. In all the weeks it had been Sir, and My Lord, and Your Grace when she was cross. Now, quiet, in front of the 40, she used the Christian name of it. "Gideon," she said. He went very still. "The barn isn't finished," said Alma Fenwick. It stood half-roofed these 4 days, open to the sky, and the frost coming. She looked up at him. Her chin wasn't up now, her chin was down, and gentle, and that cost her more than all the pride had. "Stay, stay," and raise the last of it. That was all. 4 days of it, and a month behind that, and 30 years behind that, and all she said was stay and raise the last of it. But he heard the whole of it in the one word, the way he heard everything. And the Duke of Wexmoor, who had asked her for nothing and meant it, came down off the carriage step. "I'll stay," he said. The barn was finished before the winter closed in. Thomas's ridge-piece carried it, the beam Alma's hands and Gideon's had set home together. And on the top of the ridge, where it had stood on the old barn all those years, they raised the copper hare. The Wexmoor smith had kept his word. He'd mended what was broken and gilded what was left, and every dent Thomas's hammer had put in it 31 years before was in it still, only bright now. Gold in the light, the leaping hare caught forever at the top of its leap. It turned in the wind on the ridge of the new barn and threw the sun across the yard, and the new stood upon the old, and Thomas was not wiped out, but honoured exactly as she'd asked. They were married in the spring, quiet, at the parish church at Nettlecombe. No great to-do. The village came, the same village, and Nell Harrow held the ring, and the widow of Larkmere and the Duke of Wexmoor walked out man and wife under the like gate where she'd said his name, and the hare turned bright 4 miles off on the ridge you could just see from the churchyard if you knew to look. The next harvest home was held inside the barn. Long tables down the middle of it, lantern light hung from Thomas's green oak beams, the whole village of Nettlecombe crowded in under the roof that a duke had raised in his shirt-sleeves, and the tables groaning, and the widow they'd once pitied at the head of it with her husband beside her, and every soul there lifting a glass to the pair of them. The same tongues that had wagged in August toasted them in October. That's villages for you. They sent, in the end, a letter of regret. The Provident Fire Office. It came the following year, all apology and no meaning, sorry for the lady's loss and the confusion over the lapsed premium and the office's regret at any distress occasioned. Alma read it once. Then she used it to light the harvest home lanterns, and it made as good a spill as any paper and burned just as bright. The rail went round by Marden after all. It cost the company a great deal more to bend the line around than to run it straight through Larkmere's water meadow, and they never forgave Crane for it, and no one at Larkmere ever heard the trains. On a still night you could stand in the yard under the turning hare and hear the beck and the owls and nothing else, just as Thomas had built it to be. And if you'd asked Alma, in her old age, sitting on the bench her husband made against the sunny wall of the barn, what she'd learned of the whole of it, she'd have given you her plain dry face and not much more. But she might have said this, that a thing given with a price is only a thing bought and can always be taken back. But a thing given for nothing, freely, asking nothing, that thing is yours forever. It's the only thing on this earth that can never be taken from you. That's what he taught her, the man who came asking nothing. And that's what she kept. If Alma's story warmed you, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd love to see how far it travels.